Peace in the Middle East. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is tremendously important, but is it part of biblical prophecy? And if it is, how so? Let's talk about it. So the ceasefire that was brokered by Donald Trump between Israel and Hamas, it signifies an ever-approaching fulfillment of biblical prophecy, most notable from the books of Daniel and Revelations, and I want to talk about that for a moment. But to understand it, I want to go through a quick crash course of Revelation and the events that occur in it. I want to talk about Daniel at the very end. So first off is the section of the letters to the churches. It signifies the church age, but it also addresses issues of the church. He begins addressing the church at Ephesus, and even though it is a physical church, it also signifies the years 33 through 100. That's the first part of the church age, and that's the apostolic church. He continues with Smyrna, which represents the years 100 through 313, and that's the persecuted church. And then again, Pergamos, the years 313 through 600, and this is the church of compromise. And then Thyatira, years 600 through 1517. It's the medieval or the dark ages of the church. And then the church at Sardis, which represents the years 1517 through 1750, that's the church of Reformation. And then the church at Philadelphia, that represents 1750 through 1900, is the church of revival. Finally, he addresses the church at Laodicea. That's the years 1900 to present day. And this is the lukewarm church. Unfortunately, it's the church that we are a part of today. And the next section is not an entire section at all, but it actually is encompassed, or rather it's encapsulated in a single verse right here in chapter 4, verse 1. And that's the rapture of the church. It's Jesus calling his church home to him. It's not the return of Jesus, but it's Jesus calling us to heaven. So after the third chapter, which ends with the letters of the church ages, the next chapter begins with the words, after this. Well, after what? It's after the church. So John hears a voice like a trumpet. That's the sound of the trumpet. And then he is immediately taken up in the spirit, not in the flesh, but in the spirit, into heaven. That's the rapture. And he witnesses the things which shall be hereafter. That's hereafter the church. So he's taken up and raptured and called away. And the next section is the beginning of the tribulation. That's what John began to witness from heaven. That's what Jesus was showing him in the sections following hereafter. It begins with a series of judgments, starting with the opening of 7 seals, and then the sounding of 7 trumpets. And then there's the introduction of the false trinity, or the demonic trinity, and then finally the pouring out of the 7 bowls. The opening of the seals and the consequences that they bring occur first, which lead into the next set of judgments. And the sounding of the trumpets and their consequences then usher in the false trinity and the final set of judgments. And the false trinity are represented by a war in heaven and Satan's fall from heaven, and the 2 beasts, and Satan plus the 2 beasts equals the false trinity. And then finally, the pouring out of the bowls, the final and most severe set of judgments, and are initiated by the sounding of the 7th trumpet. These represent an escalating severity and clear transitions, but also a divine order of things. Next is the second coming. That's Christ returning with the church, and it's the end of the age of the false religion. Jesus ends the false religion, and the world markets crash. And often this is confused with the rapture, the second coming. But the second coming is when Jesus actually returns to earth with the church alongside of him. The rapture happens before him. Next is the millennial reign, or the 1,000-year reign, and that's where Christ reigns with peace and righteousness with the church. And then there'll be a season of short temptation at the end of that. Next is the great white throne of judgment. And this is where the faithful and the fallen alike receive justice. It's Judgment Day, the great white throne and the one who sits upon it. Revelation says the earth and heaven fled away from his presence, but it could find no place, meaning no one or no thing escapes his throne of judgment. We need to be ready for that, my friends. And the final section speaks about the new heaven and the new earth, and that's God's kingdom eternally established. This will be the final and eternal state of creation. It's a place out of time within eternity, where God will dwell with his people perpetually. But what does all this have to do with the book of Daniel? And better than that, what does all this have to do with what's going on today? So the book of Daniel prophesies a period of tribulation or persecution, which will eventually end in the triumph of his church. And that period lasts precisely 1,260 days. Daniel 2 and 7 speaks of this period of tribulation lasting a time, times, and half a time. And that equals 1,260 days. Time being a year, times, plural, being 2 years, and half a time, meaning 6 months, so that's 3.5 years. That's two different prophets prophesying about the length of the trial and tribulation of God's people. But Daniel also speaks of one that tries to bring peace in Israel. Daniel 9 and 27 speaks of a covenant with many, and this precedes the time of the tribulation. And Donald Trump has just brokered a peace treaty between Israel and Hamas, and this is actually predicated by the Abraham Accords. And many point to this as that covenant with many. But whether this is the covenant with many or not, it does point to one thing, that the wheels toward this ideology have begun turning. But the premise of unkept peace is not only possible in this climate, but it's probable. And this ceasefire might not be the covenant with many that Daniel prophesied about in Scripture, but it is a sobering reminder. It's a warning of paramount proportions. And how is this a warning? Well, Jesus asked a question one time, and he pointed out that they could read the times and signs of the seasons. But he said, how is it that you can't read the signs of the times? I talked about the signs of the times that Jesus talked about one of my prior videos. I will leave a link to that video in the description. But our focus right now should really be to live submissively to God in all things. We need to be witnesses of his forgiveness, his mercy, his grace, and his soon return. And we can't live so desperate for the world that we're not watching and eagerly waiting for his return. I want to share scripture with you from 2 Timothy. It's chapter 4, verse 8. It says, "In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all, listen, who have loved his appearing." And if we fully submit to him and follow him faithfully, and if we are watching like someone who would love his appearing, we would truly owe no apologies.